are going to do a where to start with video to celebrate one of my all-time favorite authors. Every Thanksgiving, every American Thanksgiving, I should say, I like to do a best, favorite books of all time, favorite authors of all time, favorite series, just something to celebrate, something that I truly love. And I've got a long-term video that keeps not being ready in time for Thanksgiving for the last couple of years. So it's still not ready. So instead of that, we're going to do a where to start with video for Kingfisher, because I believe that I have now officially read everything that she has had traditionally published. I am still making my way through her back catalog of self-pub stuff. And bless her, she is prolific. I have a lot of authors that I love that are extremely prolific, which I am thankful for, but does mean it can be hard to keep up with. And also just if you're wanting to get into that author, it's just a little, I think, overwhelming of like, where should I start? So I'm going to talk about, I don't think this is going to be a super long video, but I'm going to tell you guys where I would start with T. Kingfisher for horror, where I would start with her for fantasy romance, and where I would start with her for fantasy horror, because she does write in a lot of different genres. And she actually also writes under the name Ursula Verne, I think. And I've not read any of her stuff under that name yet. That is, I believe, all children in middle grade. So eventually, when my cup runneth dry, I will then pivot and start reading her other stuff under that name. And then maybe I'll do an updated video once I've truly read everything. But I feel like I can give you a good, solid set of recommendations about where you can get going with her. So let's start with horror. And actually, let's start with the one that I don't have in physical form, because I didn't hold on to this one, but I do still think that it's really good and worth like a good place to start. And that is The Hollow Places. It is a book, well, I should start by saying most of her books, or a lot of her books, are either direct retellings or are heavily inspired by existing folk stories, stuff from Edgar Allan Poe or Lovecraft or Arthur Machen, I think. She's got a lot of references, and I'm remembering correctly, I think The Hollow Places is somewhat of a retelling of one of those earlier horror works. But the premise of it is this woman has gone to help her older relative out who has this sort of this museum of oddities / oddities store, and as she's in the process of trying to help clean some of it out, she stumbles upon another realm, and that realm is extremely horrifying. So she has a friend who's kind of along for the ride. Things escalate from there. It's a good length because it's probably like 300-ish pages, so it's a full novel, but not a super long one. I think that the atmosphere in this one is really good, and it's very representative of the kinds of settings she does. She is from, I believe, North Carolina, or at least lives there, and a lot of her stuff is set in and around sort of my neck of the woods, which is, the upper South / Appalachia. So it's representative. I think it's a good place you could start to get a sense of sort of what her vibe is like, the kinds of plots she does, and her humor. Because one of the distinctive things about T. Kingfisher is that she has a really interesting blend of horror tone with kind of a more lighthearted, authorial voice. So like the stuff that's happening is extremely horrifying, but oftentimes her kind of authorial point of view is more lighthearted than what the material is. And I think this is a good example of that, while still definitely delivering on the horror. Another one that's a standalone, and I would call this a long novella, short novel, is A House with Good Bones. And this one I would say is kind of an updated version of a different book from her. I would say it's kind of a cross between The Hollow Places and a different book she wrote called The Twisted Ones. She's also kind of back in a small town, her like hometown, to visit her mom. And there's been, her brother has kind of told her like, something's kind of going on with mom. You need to see what's going, what the deal is. And she pulls up to her mom's house, which was her grandmother's house. And her mom seems like maybe she has been in some way possessed by her grandmother, because something weird is happening. So again, we have somebody kind of coming back to their roots. We have a southern setting. We have effective horror scenes and kind of set pieces, quirky, interesting local characters who get involved. And again, it's a novella slash short story or short novel, so it's a good length, I think. And it kind of, like I said, it blends a few of her other horror premises into what I think is a very effective metaphor about sort of like different generations' response to a changing world. So yeah, this is another great one that I would recommend. And then the final horror one I'll mention is the first in a series of horror novellas that she has, which is What Moves the Dead. This is a straight up retelling, a paranormal horror fantasy retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. It is very gothic in its writing style. I would say that this is this is one of her most popular books, but I would say that it's also one of the least representative of what her writing style is generally like. She is purposely taking on sort of a higher, more gothic, authorial voice that she does not normally use, but I think it's very effective and plays well to her strengths. And this has an interesting kind of like alternative history type world where we have this made-up country that our main character was a soldier in, and they are going back to visit some friends after this conflict, and something is amiss. And if you've read The Fall of the House of Usher, you kind of know the direction it's going to take. To my fellow fungal phobes, you can tell from the cover, this has a lot of fungus stuff in it. I was able to deal with that by kind of skimming over it, but just know that is that is something I don't like. That's like one of my things I can't deal with. So it's not so much in the book that I couldn't get through it. So just FYI there. But yeah. If you like this, she's got 3 total so far, and all of them have been very consistent in quality, in my opinion. I actually would say the second and third I probably personally like a little bit better than this, but I might be in the minority there. So those are some places you could start with horror from T. Kingfisher. Next, let's go to the different variants of fantasy that you can get from T. Kingfisher. So let's start with fantasy romance. The main place you should start with that is Sword Heart. And this is this series, these are in a connected self-pub series from T. Kingfisher that are now getting picked up via traditional publishing. And it's the World of the White Rat. So there are books in the World of the White Rat that are less romance focused. So I'm going to just talk about the 2 series that are very romance focused. It's a fantasy world that the biggest things we know about it have to do with their religious systems, because all of the fantasy romance series within this feature paladins. If you've ever played D&D, you know about paladins and kind of their reputation. But they're kind of, let's call them religious knights, basically. And in Sword Heart, we have one who is trapped. He's like bound inside of a sword to do his owner's bidding. Our heroine has unexpectedly inherited him and inherited a bunch of money from a kindly older relative of her deceased husband's. And the family is basically going to try to force her to marry one of their loser sons in order to get that money back. And right when she is going to unalive herself with the sword, he pops out and he's like, well, no, obviously I can't do that. I am here to defend you, including from me. So then they kind of go on a road trip together. It has older characters. I think I like that in many of her fantasy romances, her speculative romances, she does tend to have older protagonists, which is just a nice change. It's not that common in romance. So, they're a little older. They kind of have lived a life and have more of an idea of what they want out of life. And they're just a very cute kind of grump sunshine type duo on road trip shenanigans, getting into the mix. So I love the entire series of The World of the White Rat. And I think you should just start with this probably, because I think this is if we're talking about a standalone book, this is probably the best in that entire series of about 10 books now. But there's also specifically a Paladin series, so there's sort of sub-series within the overall one. The Paladin series is really good. My favorite of the 4 that have been released so far is the second one, which is called Paladin Strength. I guess it has mild spoilers for the first one, but not really, because they're in a different locale, so there's just some allusions to some of the characters from the first book. So this is a nun with some secrets who is a complete just badass. I love her so much. And then this big old tough paladin who's there. He's kind of on a murder mystery quest type thing. The overall plot of the Paladin series does have a lot of sort of investigation happening. So there's a lot of like kind of mystery plot engines to them. And she's trying to find out what happened to the rest of her nunnery who were abducted, and she is bent on revenge. I just love them together. I love each of these characters. They're really fun. So I would say this is probably the best quality. This might be my favorite though of them, just because I really like these characters. But yeah, we're getting a sequel to this one next year, and I imagine that there are going to be more in this series, because where things have currently kind of left off, there's definitely a lot of pieces still unresolved. Then if we're talking about kind of more like general fantasy, well, okay, let's talk about, again, T. Kingfisher really loves a retelling, and she really likes to bring darker elements into a fantasy world, but still somehow have sort of like a very character-based, cozy tone. It's so interesting. I've not that part of why I really enjoy her stuff is it's combining a lot of elements that I personally really love, and I think it's very hard to get those elements to work all together. And I think, you know, there's sometimes they work better than others, and it's also a combo that doesn't work for everyone. But for me, it's so fascinating to see how she brings all this together. Anyway, if we're gonna go for some of the I'm gonna go kind of lighter tone to more horror tone for her fantasy. And I would say A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking definitely has some like really, like I cried in this book. There's some really intense moments in it, but it's, I would say, one of her more kind of more straightforwardly fantasy books. It is YA, so it's also a YA recommendation. But I would say it reads very well for adults. Oh, and evidently it's the 2021 Lodestar Award for Best Young Adult Book. So there you go. And the Andre Norton Nebula Award for middle grade in YA fantasy. So we've got a young girl who has magic, but it is very obscure magic in terms of it doesn't seem very useful. She basically can infuse her baking with magic. And so she's been kind of overlooked by the powers that be that want to, you know, use magic in specific ways, until there is a serial killer who's hunting for people like her, and the city, just due to different machinations, ends up like not having its magic users, and so she has to figure out how to use what is seemingly very small magic in a powerful way. So I love what it has to say about like small gifts being powerful. I think for like that theming with the young adult side of it, I love. And there's some just really moving stuff about macro forces and how people get caught up in them and sacrifice. And I don't know, the ending I found very moving. But it has that kind of lighter hearted tone. It is YA. It doesn't get too dark. So if you're looking for something that has kind of that shows some of her kind of humor to it, I think that's more intrinsic to the premise of this one. I think this could be a good go-to. Then I would say, if I was going to tell you the single book that I think is the highest quality of any of her books I've read, I would tell you A Sorceress Comes to Call, her best quality book. I think that it plays to her strengths. One of the things that can happen, and especially in some of her self-pub stuff, is if her books get a little long, they start getting a little baggy in the middle. I really like her writing, so I'm usually okay with that, to vibe out and just enjoy her world and enjoy my time in the book. But if I'm talking like on a technical level, like that's a weakness in the books. This one doesn't. It's a good length. It has the right amount. The pacing is really good in this one. It really keeps you moving. It is a retelling of, I think, the Goose Girl. That sounds like the fairy tale, but I would say the retelling is more like an inspiration starting point versus like a beat by beat retelling of it. We have this young woman whose mother is an evil sorceress lady, and she is basically, it's kind of a metaphor for child abuse, but she's no longer a child, I believe, by the time we are seeing her. She's like a young woman about to, like, she's of marriageable age kind of a thing. And her mother is able to manipulate people in a certain way. I don't want to get into details too much because you should just read it, but she's been living by manipulating one person. That situation is coming to an end. She needs to find a new person to manipulate. And so she brings her daughter along to this new, evil grift she's got going on. And we have point of views from the daughter and then from the sister of the person that the mother is trying to manipulate. So the sister is trying to save the victim of the manipulation, but then is also trying to figure out what's going on with the daughter. The daughter is just horrified by the whole thing, and she's like under her mother's control. So it ends up essentially being kind of a dark fairy tale retelling within a fantasy Regency type setting. And I just think that she nailed it. This is a really just a great story. It plays to her strengths. You have moments of seeing her humor. You see the sort of found family that she tends to be very drawn to in these books that creates that kind of cozy element, even if on paper what's happening is not cozy. I think she has some really lovely metaphors, as good horror / fantasy should have, in my opinion. Some good, effective, kind of dramatic moments, really good pacing throughout. Yeah, I just think that this is her best book and a really good example of her version of what she does in fantasy. And then I would say of these, the darkest is Nettle and Bone. And this is probably, I would say, her second highest quality book in terms of on a more technical level. This is not a specific fairy tale retelling, but it definitely has sort of those mythic qualities. There are these two sisters. One of them is married to an evil king, and our protagonist kind of makes a deal with the devil type of thing, or like engages in some dark magic to try to save her sister. There ends up being that, again, found family element. There's a road trip kind of element where they're going to try to save the sister. Just realized that also technically, I guess this is another nun on a revenge / saving mission because our main character is the third youngest daughter of these princesses, so she was sent off to a convent. Yeah, this is just another good, I think, example of dark themes. There's a lot of exploration of sort of domestic violence in this book, horrifying imagery, definitely some horror elements here, but combined with these kind of classic fairy tale mythic elements and T. Kingfisher's cozy found family elements and humor. So yeah, this I think would be another good place to start if that appeals to you. So yeah, those are, I think that's like 8 possible places to start, and I did not even cover all of her books. I'm like looking over to the T. Kingfisher shelf. She's extremely prolific, so she's an author that if you enjoy, the good news is that there's a lot for you out there, kind of like Nora Roberts or Nalini Singh or Ruby Dixon, like some of my favorite authors. It's like, ooh, okay, well, if you should definitely try this person, because if you like them, there's a whole lot of it. So if any of those different kind of subgenres she plays with appeal to you, I definitely recommend picking her up. And yeah, I have 2 more conventionally published things from her, either in advanced reader copy or on their way to me here in the next week or 2. So she's still cranking them out. So I expect that I will update this at some point once I've gotten through all of her self-pub catalog as well, and there's just more of her stuff out there. But yeah, let me know if you are a reader of T. Kingfisher, if you agree, if you disagree, if there's other places you would tell people to start. There's a lot to choose from, so there's definitely room for a lot of different opinions. And yeah, I think that will do it for this one. I hope you're having a lovely day. I hope you're taking care of yourself and your friends and your family and your neighbors. And if you want to know what I'm going to post, hit the bell, because I don't know. It'll happen. Actually, I actually do know this time. You should be seeing me soon because we're at the end of the year. So I got a lot of stuff I got to get out. So you should be seeing me soon, but hit the bell, subscribe, like, all that good stuff if you want to. And yeah, anyway, I will just talk to you guys soon. Bye!